This episode of Fall Obsession Podcast is brought to you guys in partnership with Hoot Camo, Bear River Archery, Tacticam Reveal, and the Outdoor Call Radio app. If you guys want to check out some discount codes that some of these partners have specifically for you Fall Obsession Podcast listeners, then I encourage you to go to the episode description wherever you're listening. That includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Carbon TV, all the other apps, and you will find those codes there to save some money with some of these partners. Be sure that you guys are following the show, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure that you give us a like on our social media pages. We always appreciate that support. My name is Sam Thrash, and I am your show host. And this week I have two guys on the show, one of our own Fall Obsession team members, John Kessler, and a guest that he connected me with, Justin Bunting. He's an Alaskan guide, and he comes on the show to tell us the story of his Boone and Crockett Alaskan moose that he took in 2024. Hope you guys enjoy this conversation. It's a good one. You guys are listening to another Fall Obsession podcast.
The power lies within that middle ground.
Hunting transformed my life.
I think you have to be built somewhat different.
That Dale Brisby's a super puncher.
When you get Pop-Tarts on the next Walmart order. I'm serious.
Because to come into this country and stay dedicated to that, it was pretty awesome.
If it's only for one, then you've done your job.
We have to do what's right for the wildlife, and that's our responsibility as hunters.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to another Fall Obsession Podcast episode. We are live on YouTube this evening once again. I got two gentlemen on the show with me right now. One of our own team members here at Fall Obsession, John Kessler, returning once again. And then our guest this week is Mr. Justin Bunting. Welcome to Fall Obsession Podcast, Justin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, I'm super excited, and I'll admit I got real excited when John started talking about your Alaskan moose that we are going to get into in this story, because that is certainly a dream for this Texas boy and something that I have not really come close to being able to accomplish yet. But before we dive into it, just right out of the gate, want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our listeners, tell them a little bit about yourself, and most importantly, why you're a hunter.
Yeah, well, basically live in Gunnison, Colorado, and have been going up to Alaska now for 7 seasons this spring. And it kind of alternates, spring, fall, and, depending on what type of animal I'm guiding, whether it's, spring years, on the peninsula, fall years, they alternate, even in the spring, odd in the fall. But I'm usually consistently guiding, moose hunters, in the fall, in September, along with some Dall sheep clients, and then, back to bear camp, in the fall. And then outside of that, I kind of return back to Colorado and run a construction company in the summer and shovel a pile of snow in the winter time, and just kind of, looking forward to that next hunting season. But, I think my draw to hunting in general is just the connection, with the mountains and the places that I get to go. Especially just those off the beat places. I really try to, get away from things and create the atmosphere that I really want to be in. Getting away from people is obviously getting harder and harder to do these days, but that's definitely something that I strive for.
Yeah.
But as far as the whole, guiding thing, the opportunity presented itself, years ago, and I kind of fell in love with the challenge of it. Going out and, say I do a lot of hunting on my own, solo hunting, horseback hunting. And I think it to me, it's such an accomplishment to kind of take somebody that's either a never ever or somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of experience and put them in that situation in that environment, the weather, the terrain,
Yeah.
the game itself, all of that just kind of compiled into, seeing the looks on their face and the experiences and sharing that with them, and just the challenge of it all. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stress involved in it, but it's cool when you're successful. There's obviously sometimes there's trips when things don't go as planned. Fortunately enough, I haven't had a whole lot of those trips. I've been pretty successful. So, yeah, that's kind of the deal. Just the challenge of it and putting people on animals in close quarters and pursuing animals. It's obviously fun to have someone go along, with you for, the companionship and things like that out on those hunts. And so, it's cool to share it with people that may not do it otherwise.
Yeah. So as far as those encounters and everything, and I know, excuse me, I know that John, you have a little bit of guiding experience as well. So this is kind of a question for both of y'all, but as a guide, golly, I got a frog in my throat. As a guide, what is the ideal range that you were trying to put your client within on a given animal? And does it vary depending on that animal?
Yeah, it real depends. Depends on the client, depends on the animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as big bears are concerned, I'm generally trying to get people within 200 yards. A little less is, a bonus, and it's happened before, but that I've had bear hunters on the peninsula take big brown bears out to almost 400 yards.
Wow.
And in the state of Alaska, I am allowed to essentially follow up my hunter if there's not, that immediate kill shot. And so I do like both of us to be within a ethical range. I do strive for that a lot. I don't like to poke at animals. And I think John could agree, wounded elk are an SOB. And then that's probably put to the 10th power when you've got a big coastal brown bear that's been hit or wounded, and he's hiding in the alders, essentially waiting for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same thing with Dall sheep, like that generally in that 300 to 400 range. Guys have gotten so proficient with their firearms these days and the technology. I do run through with my clients and say, hey, listen, if the situation's perfect, we can't get any closer. What range are you really good at? Rock solid. In that perfect situation. You don't always get the perfect situation, but there are times where things, do come together and you're able to get steady. But it's nice to be able to put that one shot on that animal, obviously, and not have to be, shooting holes in it more or less.
Absolutely. I'm that was just a question more out of curiosity because I've talked to several guides, on the show even over the years and everything, and that's always been something that they have discussed as far as just trying to get those clients in closer, and sometimes closer than folks remember, because you could have or folks would realize, I guess, not having the experience, I should say, because you could have the most technologically advanced firearm in the world, and it's only as good as the guy behind it, at the end of the day. So I completely understand that.
Right. And there's a lot of people that come to hunts with brand new equipment, whether it be, a new set of binos with range finding capability, and they haven't really figured out that there's, meters and there's yardage on there, and they're ranging and they're like, oh, this doesn't work, and they don't have the right setting, or they don't really know their scope very well, or their gun. It's like they bought it for the hunt, and that's okay, because people get excited and they want to get new components and all that stuff. But I always stress, just bring what you're very comfortable with shooting, and you're familiar with the recoil of the firearm, and how you can follow up very quickly if need be with your scope.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
What have you guided any bow hunters? Any guys that you had to get crazy close with?
Yeah, actually, we did have a guy down on the peninsula, and he had actually brought a film crew with him. And that turned into a little bit of a hodgepodge. We had gotten him close, numerous times, and the cameraman had actually fallen down a few times, and his camera had made noise, and he had scared bears and pushed bears off. But we had gotten into, 80 yards, 70 yards, and he was like, oh, I can make the shot. And obviously you try to get him in closer. And my employer at the time down there had paired me up with another seasoned brown bear guide just for that backup. And obviously to kind of help, the film crew with protection and all that stuff too. But he did end up, after blowing a couple of stocks, whether it was from the film dude or him just not having things right with his bow, he did end up shooting his bear with my buddy's gun, another guide. And that was a long talk we had one time at camp when we were like, hey, we had a great bear come today, and there's no shame. We weren't pushing him, but there was no shame in like achieving success on your dream hunt and not going home empty handed because you just, you couldn't get it right. So
Yeah, I can appreciate both sides of it, I guess. And John probably knows a little bit more about about my stubborn mentality, because I'm a big bow hunter, and all of my, I'm a resident hunter in the state of Texas, but all of my non-resident hunts in Montana, Colorado, Idaho have been with a bow. And I'm batting about 500. I'm about halfway successful with it. And the big one was, the last out of state hunt I did was an Idaho elk hunt, and I was unsuccessful, but we as a hunting party were successful, and that was still very rewarding for me. Another guy in camp, and I was with him when he shot his elk, so it was pretty cool. But I remember the guy. It wasn't an official, outfitter or guide or anything like that, but we went with a good friend who had a lot of experience, who kind of acted as our guide. And when he called that bull elk in to, under 60 yards for me, I just didn't have a clear shot with all the brush. He was more excited than I was, because for 20 plus years, he'd only rifle hunted, and he'd never called one in that close. He never had to. And so he was over there shaking like a leaf, and I'm a Texas boy up here in the mountains, ready to fling an arrow. And I'm looking at him like, dude, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
This is your backyard.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a fun time for sure. And one thing that resonated with me too, you said earlier on, talking about yourself and everything, you talked about kind of some of the other things that you do as far as, work and construction and that kind of stuff. And, I think that a 50,000-foot ignorant perception of guides is that you get paid to take people hunting for a living. And a lot of people don't realize that you got a job the other months out of the year that you gotta bring home the bacon at the same time. So it's a grind on both sides, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, guiding brought me back actually a lot of sanity back in my life. Because for a long time it was just hammer, hammer, hammer construction, and obviously paying bills and doing things like that. And when the opportunity came to do it, I felt like I was really in my element with the whole guiding thing. But it also offered me a lot of time to kind of sit back, and there's a lot of just peace for the most part. There's stress, but there's a lot of peace out there. I'm flown into some of the most beautiful remote areas that Alaska has to offer, and so it's definitely my sanctuary when I'm out there, and when I come home, I'm obviously blessed to have the profession that I have here, and I do enjoy doing it, but it's on my mind almost every day on where I was last and where I'm going. So, but and it's not a real big money thing. Obviously, the pay scale has gone up a little bit on your basic guide wage, which can kind of fluctuate from say $500 to $1,500, depending on what species I'm taking hunters out for. But most of your guides, I think, will tell you that the money is kind of in the tipping from your hunters, and that coupled with your guide wage for say a 10-day hunt, it's good money, and it's whether you shoot on day 1 or day 9 or 10, you are guaranteed that guide wage. And then as long as you're a personable guide and you have a good time and you keep things safe and you keep it real, the tips are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's certainly a job that I think is coveted by many, I would say. Now, they might not understand the work that it takes, but I imagine there's a lot of people out there that, would love the opportunity to be able to spend a lot of time in the woods like that. So, and you gain a lot of personal experience and knowledge in that as well. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of pros to it. I want to get into this moose hunt and this mammoth of a animal that you killed. Before we do, I want to make sure that John doesn't have anything for you more on the guide side or anything that he wants to add or anything like that.
Nah, he's nailed it so far.
Awesome. Well, Justin, with this episode and with us putting this thing out, there's a picture of you sitting behind a huge moose. How did this opportunity come along?
Yeah. Well, basically, I had hashed out details for my schedule with my boss at the time on what trips I was taking for the fall. At the time, I had a couple of Dall sheep hunters, and then I had 2 moose camps after that. And we ended up right before I left for camp. He had told me that one of my moose hunters, my first moose hunter, had canceled. And he said, how do you feel about, being able to go out and try to take your own moose this year? And of course, I was like, wow, this is awesome. I can't thank you enough. Yeah, I'm ready to go. I'll be ready to go, and I'll have the tag in my pocket, and just kind of plan for it. I had called a good buddy here that I've known for a long time, Evan Sandstrom, and kind of shotgunned him and just said, hey man, be ready, around the 5th of September, and I'll come pick you up from Anchorage after my Dall sheep hunt, and we'll fly back, up the highway and get to camp and be flown out, by I think maybe the 6th or 7th, I think is when we were finally in the field. But I did have a pretty gnarly Dall sheep hunt that unfolded before the moose hunt. And I mean, the hunter was able to take a 9.5-year-old, double broomed ram. And unfortunately, he was a little bit wounded, and we had to spend 3 or 4 hours in some pretty heinous weather up and down mountains to try to find this ram. And the ram was, finally dispatched, I think 3 or 4 hours after the initial shot. and then packing him off and back down. I was happy to get the job done. No one likes to see it go down like that, but that is hunting. And
Yeah.
and so and the rams are extremely tough. People just really don't know, you know, the they're they thrive to live. They're just
Yeah.
like they're like as tough as an elk. Their will to live is pretty unmatched.
Yeah. Extremely resilient.
It's pretty wild. But so I got done with the Dall sheep, and I had a little bit of time. I think we took the ram on day 6 of his 10-day hunt, and I had about a week before the moose hunt was going to happen. About a week and a half. The season started on September 8th, and it would run till the 18th, and then I would do a second moose hunt from the 20th to the 30th in this particular unit I was in, guiding in. And I opted to do a little bit of some salmon fishing to kind of ease a little bit of the anxiety and everything I had from that Dall sheep hunt, and loaded my truck on a ferry and went up to Valdez and fished for 5 or 6 days, went over to Cordova and salmon fished over there. I love to fish a bunch. And then took the ferry back to Whittier and drove into Anchorage and picked Evan up. Evan had never been to Alaska. He's a hunter here in Colorado, and I've been on multiple, hunting excursions with him here in Colorado. And he just was a really, really upbeat dude with some positivity that I just really admired about him in a lot of situations. So I said, you know what, he was my number one choice.
Yeah.
And so I basically picked him up, and we drove north about 5-6 hours and got to the lodge and kind of ran through some logistics. We normally, if we didn't have a hunter in this location, and I had guided this drainage for years, and usually had a couple of moose hunts in there. I'd done, sheep hunts in this drainage also. And I really knew it like the back of my hand, and was very successful in that drainage. I think I averaged moose in there at like 63, 64 inches every time.
Oh, wow.
And a couple of years I had shot moose with both hunters on the first day. So this was a great opportunity, for me to go in there in an area I really knew, and just kind of put myself to the test and see if I could come out with something. I definitely wasn't like, hey, I'm going to go in there and try to kill the biggest thing I possibly could, and I'm going to hold out and all this stuff. I just wanted a good representation of a moose. I would have shot a 55. I would have shot a 60-inch moose if it would have been within my range.
Yeah. So you had plenty of experience as a guide in this area, but was this your first time hunting moose as the hunter itself, or had you killed moose already yourself?
No, this was actually my first time hunting a moose in Alaska. I had just kept taking hunters.
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
Either watch them pass on moose, or shoot the moose he really liked, and lots of different scenarios. But yeah, this was the first time that I had a tag in my pocket.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so you're looking, you're talking about, just for the experience, you're looking for, you're willing to shoot a 55, you're willing to shoot a 60. So at what point did you actually lay eyes on this giant? Or if I'm jumping too far ahead, then just pump the brakes on me, and we can back it up. But
no, I think that's a good comment for sure to start things off, because over the years I had seen this bull a couple of times in 22 and in 23.
Okay.
He never really showed himself, but a couple of times with clients during those years. Like I would be flown out in the field and I would have a day in camp, or we would have heinous weather come in, and then, you know, the hunter wouldn't come in for 2 or 3 days. And so, well, I would just not spread my scent around, but I would, you know, hike up to smaller little vantage points and just survey the land and see what was going on, seeing what bears were in the drainage, because I became a grizzly magnet in that drainage. My boss just commented, do you have some sort of bear cologne on? Like, I always had run-ins with grizzlies, some bad and some good.
Dang.
So I was, you know, you're always looking for sows and cubs, and you're just being vigilant, because that's how you avoid accidents and, right, you know, pressuring animals in their doing their natural thing, obviously.
Yeah.
But so basically, I had seen him a couple of times on my own, and he was an absolute beast years ago still. And it had even got some footage of him a few times through the spotting scope. And was like, man, that is just unreal. Hopefully he comes around when the hunter comes in, you know, and we can find him again. And for whatever reason, he had vanished. He had gone back into the deep timber. A couple of times I watched wolf packs, you know, drive him back off into other drainages. And I did see him a few times with some clients, but for whatever reason in the stock, we lost him in the timber. He never wanted to really play ball. The couple of times I had him with clients, he didn't really respond to any calls. He was a very, very smart bull. And as they say, they are smart when they get that big. They know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know. But so we ended up getting flown out, I believe somewhere around I want to say right on the 8th, the opening of the season. And for me, and we had a tent on the river bar like we normally have set up for a client. Pretty basic, you know, as we tried to fly in there as light as we could to keep the fuel costs down and things like that. And then I also had a grizzly moose combo hunt to follow up to finish the year out. So I was trying to just keep logistics, you know, super simple for my employer. And that area is known to get hit pretty hard with some snow late in September, to where you can, you know, be stranded for days, and you're shoveling runways off for multiple days to see if he can make a pass and come pick you up. For the first couple of days, including the flight into the drainage, you know, when you get to fly in, you can see some animals from above, and you make mental notes on where you see those animals and stuff. By no means do we ever fly to look for a specific animal, or do we really do any pre-scouting. That's not done with me.
Gotcha.
I am flown into the drainage that has been, you know, successful. It produces good animals. And so we just fly into camp and we go hunting. There's no, as I say, cheating from air.
Gotcha.
And I don't really call it cheating. That's not what we do. That's not what we were doing. And so it was fly me in, fly Evan in, and we had 10 days. I had 10 days to get it done before my next hunt. And so those first couple of days, we didn't see a moose, period. And generally that first season, you're not doing a lot of calling. They're not really responding. It's more of like a spot and stalk hunt. And so I think on the third day, we saw a pretty decent bull. Um, we were able to call him in to within 300-400 yards in the deep timber, and he gave us the sneak. Might have saw one of us move a hair or something. Moose are generally, they're extremely smart animals. I don't think a lot of people really understand that, but if you've got a big bull out in the open and you're calling him, and obviously you're working wind and things like that, and you have everything kind of in your favor, um, to create a shot opportunity, these moose will come in through the timber, and they'll hang back a little bit, and they'll try to look through every little twig and, you know, bush and things to try to see where that cow call or where that scraping is coming from, especially in that early season when they're not completely crazed out rutting looking for the ladies.
Yeah.
How thick is the timber?
Um,
I mean, like, can you see 100 yards in it, or are you talking 50 yards?
We're talking probably
yards.
50 yards.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, it's awfully thick, and then you have alders, you know, that are 10 feet high. You have willow. There's a lot of dense coverage, especially in the drainage that I was. Some of the other guides that I guided with the outfit, their terrain was pretty similar to. I was in one of the biggest drainages in our private concession. It was a mile wide in some areas.
Oh, wow.
Down towards the lower stretch, up into the headwaters of it were maybe a quarter mile, or, you know, a little more than that wide. And it was roughly 20 miles long.
Oh, wow.
So
this is a lot of ground that you're covering. You paint a really good picture for me, just, you know, not having experience in this kind of country that you're talking about and everything. It's, you know, you say drainage and, you know, guys try to envision exactly what you're talking about, but that paints a picture of just the vast size of this area that you're hunting in. That's a lot.
yeah, and I'm in that drainage. There's a lot of places where we're glassing from, and you're basically looking over into the Yukon.
Gotcha.
We're right there on the Canadian border there. But as far as the layout of the land in this drainage, there was a massive swamp area, to where the river ultimately terminated into this swamp area. We're talking bogs and huge beaver ponds and lakes, and that's where those moose would be at in the summertime. And as the season progressed, they would migrate up into higher country, up into these side hills and up into the high mountains to, you know, look for the cows. And so they would slowly start to work up from, say, what I called swampland. And this was so far out, even with a good, you know, Swaro spotting scope, you could see some of the big paddles, you know, out in the swamp. And you were like, wow, you know, there's some days I would count 30 to 40 bulls.
Oh, wow.
Out past me, way down. And you would call a little bit, and each day they would progressively work up. And some days they'd hang out for a couple of days, and then they'd work further up. And that was kind of their regiment. And I've seen him go over mountain passes that were, you know, 6,000 feet. You're like, whoa, why is there a moose up there? But they are incredible creatures, and they are able to get around, you know,
Yeah.
very, very well.
Yeah. No, that's crazy. The like talking about the timber and stuff like that, you know, you hear horror stories of people getting attacked by moose or having these close encounters and stuff, and you were just talking about how much time they'll spend, working their way in and looking and trying to find, that bull that's scraping or that cow that's calling, whatever it might be. Um, what's the reality of that? Like, as far as compared to the conceptions that people have about, moose being super aggressive and that kind of stuff in close quarters and that kind of thing. If they get close, are are they more likely to spook if they see you, or are they going to get defensive? And that's probably a novice question, but I'm novice when it comes to moose hunting. So,
Sure. And I mean, given the time of the year and how close it is to the rut, I think their intensity level, fluctuates depending on that. Um, and really even like here in Colorado, I think recently we've had some people get stomped by some moose, some cow moose. They raise the hair on my back a little more than the bulls do, because they are very aggressive, especially with, young calves and things like that.
yeah.
And then another example would be, say you called in a sublegal bull, meaning we are in a 50-inch spread or greater, or the bull must have 4 brow tines on one side.
Okay.
Okay. So that kind of gives you a sense of what we could take in our concession
Gotcha.
per Alaska Fish and Game. But getting closer to the rut and things like that, where they're really coming in hot and heavy to that cow call or that scrape, you could call in a sublegal bull that just keeps coming and coming and coming, to the fact to where you're waving your arms and this and that. And I've gotten my gun, ready at hand a few times, because you're like, we're waving and like yelling at this moose and he's still coming. Like, you may end up being his girlfriend type of thing. I don't,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? But for the most part, there was one time we had a fella fly over my drainage, and dropped in on the upper part of the drainage and was hunting a little bit with his buddy. And that was actually the year that I took the big moose in 24.
Okay.
And he was up in a real rustic cabin that was grandfathered into my employer. He actually had built the cabin. And it was kind of like a bona fide tough shed. It had a stove in it and bunks, but we would use that for the late hunt because it got so cold and there was generally a lot of snow.
Yeah.
And so he was up there, and that was actually the first time. That was the only person I ever saw in that drainage guiding. So there wasn't like I had hunters competing. Obviously, nobody else could guide in there because I was working in a private concession that my boss had. And so as long as you kept your distance from an animal you really didn't want an interaction from, you could either skirt tail the cow and the calf, or, when things got hairy, you would just really make some serious noise and wave off a sublegal bull or something like that. I guess you could shoot a shot off in the air, but nothing ever got to that level. Obviously, we wanted to try to be as quiet as we could in there also, but
Gotcha.
Well,
yeah, that's good to know. Always curious on the reality versus the perception a little bit, but anyway, I keep getting sidetracked with a couple questions and stuff that popped in my head, but
no worries.
Anyway, kind of getting back to your story. So you mentioned that you've been in here for a couple of days, and I believe you said that you hadn't really seen a whole lot for the first 2 days that you were in there.
Right. Yeah. And when I initially flew out with my boss, we didn't see anything at all. It was extremely dry, and normally that time of the year, it's very low numbers. The a little bit of a heat wave going on. So what is out there is hunkered down. We might have saw a dinker or something, 2 drainages over, but that was obviously way out of, I wasn't going somewhere that far away with a camp right here.
Yeah.
How far from camp were you hunting?
Basically we're trying to keep our scent down as much as we can. And so we're not really like ridge pounding. We're not walking around, for miles and miles trying to find moose. We're basically trying to find a good vantage point. And these are vantage points that I've taken other hunters on. And so I kind of know the gamut. I know the trail right there to where we're point A to point B. And so I'm basically on that particular hunt, my hunt, we weren't any further than a half a mile away from the 10 on the river bar.
Gotcha.
About as far as you want to carry a moose.
On a good hunt, that's a blessing. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think I packed one that was pretty close to 2 miles one time, and that was with the exception of some pretty brutal brown bear packouts, that one sawed me off a little bit. But the hunter I had was plenty capable, and he helped out and kind of lessened everything, and it was okay. I mean, you just got to do what you got to do to fill the tag for these guys.
Yeah.
But so yeah, we're staying kind of close. And basically your day, you're up early. You're not up too early in the dark because you don't want to bump anything that you can't see. And so right as you can really start to see something, I like to start moving my hunters up into the woods. And so I basically followed the same regimen. And so we were kind of up in our glassing spot that time of the year by like 8:00. And I mean, moving slow and looking and listening and moving up into that spot. And Evan and I had done a little bit of calling about halfway up to the glassing hill a couple of days in a row. And, ultimately we made it up to that spot. And that's where we pretty much sat all day long and just did a few cow calls here and there and a little bit of scraping and tried to stay as motionless as we could. And just a lot of glassing to see anything coming from the trees, the brush, whatnot.
Are those moose on their feet all day? Or is it more like elk hunting where you get an hour and a half in the morning and an hour and a half in the evening, and the rest of the day you're just napping under the willows?
It's weird. I think morning time, especially in that later season when it's very, very cold in the morning, I see a lot of movement. And then you would see maybe some movement, a little bit of movement during the middle of the day. And just like your bull elk's going to do, he's going to get up and kind of get a little restless. He's going to move around, not a lot. He's just going to move around a little bit, maybe go take a little drink from the spring he's sitting next to and go right back into his, into his bed. And then obviously closer to the evening when it would cool off, you would see some action, but morning time was always a stronghold. It shot a lot of moose in the early mornings.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so as the hunt progressed, I think I called in, let's see, would have been by day 5, day 6. I had called in 3 other bulls. One was about a mid-60, and he had come into shooting range, and I'm talking less than 100 yards, and I was actually about ready to take this moose, but he did not present a clear shot to me. Other people might have taken the opportunity and shot, and maybe the moose moved out into the open and you dispatch him then, but I don't hunt that way. And if it just doesn't happen, I don't like to really shove it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not really trying to pressure it. It's not supposed to happen that day. And I'll back out and try to, make some notes and come back to that again and hopefully get a really good ethical shot on the animal.
Yeah.
But it was a little nerve wracking. We were both standing there, and this excellent bull was just had his vitals all covered up. There was no neck shot. He was just in the perfect location, and then he kind of got tired of whatever was going on in there, and he actually turned and walked completely away from us with his ass facing us right behind that tree the whole time, and just disappeared into the timber. And we never saw him again. Kind of just let him go. And I was trying to just be as patient as I could and take the best opportunity I could and make sure that I wasn't going to be tracking a wounded animal back in there. Cause it's a bird's nest back there. If you know what I mean. It's thick, and it's not fun to track wounded animals back in there. But I think on day.
What rifle are you carrying?
Yeah, I'm carrying an older A-bolt medallion Browning in 338 Win Mag, and I've got a 250 grain partition, Nosler partition in that. And I use that for pretty much all my hunts. I do pack a little bit of a short shotgun for, say, bear defense. And so when I do get a moose down, I just leave the mag back at the tent, and I carry the short shotgun with me for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Some years I'd wear a pistol, but being a guide, you're obviously trying to be as light as you can. And so I always generally went with one long rifle on the hunts. But let's see, this would have been, I think on day 7 of our hunt, the morning of day 7, I was glassing over towards a body of water that had killed a lot of moose with clients. And I see this rack come out of the trees, and he's just standing there, and I start really studying him again. And I looked at Evan, and I'm just like, holy cow, this has gotta be this bull that I have seen, numerous times throughout my guiding career there. Yeah. And I wasn't 100% sure, but man, he just had, 2 sheets of plywood on either side, and he just kept turning. He didn't have any company with him. He didn't have any bulls messing with him at that point. And we didn't see any other cows with him either. We did a little bit of calling. We stayed reserved. He was a ways off. And we went back to the tent that night. We were like pretty pumped. Oh man, I think he's in here. Like, I think we can make a play on him if he, the wind stays the way it is, and we don't run him off, essentially. And then he played ball with us a little bit. The next day, he never got closer. He kind of hung out in the same spruce pocket. And so we really had a good idea of where he was. And again, went back to the tent that night, and we were, I'm kind of like looking at my watch, like, oh man, I got another hunter coming in 4 or 5 days. Like, this is getting down to the wire. I wish that 60-inch moose would have moved out in the trees a little bit more. We'd be packing meat and we'd be celebrating. And, but the next day, this would have been the bottom of the 9th. day. And we went up from the tent in the morning and we beelined it to the glassing hill to see if we could put eyes on him. We got up to the glassing hill, and about 10 minutes on the glassing hill, he showed his face at this pond that I had dumped a bunch of moose with clients. He was at the pond.
Nice.
And I had taken, numerous trips through there, made plenty of stalks to that pond from that glassing knob. I knew exactly how much time it was going to take us. The wind was perfect. And I looked at Evan, and his eyes were bugging out of his head, just like, holy cow, this thing is unreal. And he goes, well, what should we do? And I said, we're going to go straight down to the river bar again, and we're going to drop everything we don't need. Bring your insulation, your rain gear, and your knives, and we're going to go put it on this bull. I feel good about this. I've been in here. I know exactly how to get in here.
Yeah, you got the playbook already.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the blood was really flowing. I was really starting to get excited at this moment. And we got down to the tent, dumped everything off, few river crossings. We went down probably about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile down the river. And then we had to go up a steep embankment. And then kind of I took a little bit of an azimuth of a landmark, because it's so thick in there, and it, had put us right on the edge of the pond. And Evan's behind me, and we roll up to this tree that I had stood by numerous times and had hunters actually shoot off the branches of this particular tree. And I'm sitting there and I'm just looking around with my binos, and I'm like, he's just not out in the open. He's not in the pond. He's not standing anywhere. I felt very confident he just wasn't there in the open.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, he hasn't gone far. I mean, it was fairly warm out. There was a light rain, and I'm looking around, and my glass catches this white, shiny, like woody texture. And to me at first, it looked like a tree had snapped off, and it was like that, that white sheen of like a snapped off tree stump. And I really started to look at it a little bit more, and he moved just a few inches. And it was his tines, and he was bedded down.
Oh, wow.
He had bedded down in the marsh of the pond. And at this point, we were probably 125, 130 yards from him, ranging. His paddle had finally come into view. Wind crushing us in the face. He had no idea we were in there. And I looked back at Evan, and I was like, he's right there. He's right there. And he's on my heels, and we start to make it a little bit shorter of a distance in there, because the wind was just perfect. And I'm like, if this is the bull I think it is, I want to make sure he goes down with one shot, and we can do this.
Yeah.
So we closed the gap into about 60 yards.
Oh, wow.
And I put one in the pipe, and I kind of, bring my scope up to my eye. And at that point, he stood up. He stood up and was staring right at me, fronts. And being a guide, my first reaction was I looked at both sides of him, and I noticed that he had plenty of garbage on both sides as far as brow tines.
Yeah.
That was like my legal strong point. If he's got 4, we can shoot him. His rack obviously was pretty massive. That was a no-brainer. But in that situation, you're just trained to be like, okay, is he legal?
Yeah.
And I immediately saw that, and he was staring right at me at 50, 60 yards. And I put the first bullet right through the center of his chest. And reloaded immediately. He took 5 or 6 steps to my left, and I was able to put one more right behind the shoulder. And we heard him kind of run a little bit through the alders, and then it went completely quiet. And I think we both at that moment knew that, like, with as much brush and timber that was around, we would have heard him crashing through all of that.
Yeah, if he kept going, an animal that big, you'd hear it. It sounded like a freight train leaving.
We definitely would have heard it. And so, you know, you rack another one, and we're just like, I think we dumped this moose, this just monster moose. And so we started walking over, and there's some blood. There's actually a pretty good blood trail there. And he didn't go any more than 20 to 30 yards. And I walked up on him, and his ass was kind of facing us. And, you know, he's facing the other way, laid down, and he had gone down in basically, I don't know how to say this, but basically he went down in just like the perfect picture pose. His feet were out front, and his head was laid down with his nose right in between like his hocks of his front legs. And his rack was perfectly, Evan and I hardly had to move him to take pictures. We looked at him and we're like, wow, like this is incredible. And when I walked up to him at first, we were like dead silent. Cause I knew he was big. But like a fisherman, you don't carry a tape measure out on the lake. It's bad luck. But my 338 measures 48 inches from the very tip to the tail of the gun. And we walked around the front of him, and I set it up there, and I still had
3 feet to go.
I almost could have laid another rifle in there. And Evan's like, wow, holy cow, this is a big moose, right? And I'm like, dude, this is legendary. This is like an all-time animal.
Yeah.
This is him. And so we basically kind of, we took some pictures. He was shot excellent. I mean, he had one bullet that had gone through the front into his heart, and the other one was right behind the shoulder, and it bounced around a little bit in there, and it was a pretty instant death as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And he just didn't go very far.
That's awesome. Yeah, that was a question I was going to ask, was because, with guiding experience and everything, I would imagine you get pretty decent at being able to at least ballpark judge an animal on the hoof and everything. But I mean, obviously you truly understood the caliber of animal that you just put down, and how rare that is. That's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, a 50-inch moose is a big moose.
Yeah.
Another 24 inches, 24 and 3/4 inches on the hoof. He went 74 and 3/4 inches on the hoof.
Wow.
And that was after my boss came in and we got him back to the lodge, and I was getting like basically recycled, and shook Evan's hand and was like, hey buddy, it's been unreal to experience this with you. I'm so pumped. You were excellent help, all this stuff. Like, I got to get going on this other hunt.
Yeah, I got to go to work now.
Yeah. And we had officially taped him out with a tape measure, to 74 and 3/4. And it was like, okay, all right, well, back in the plane, you have one more hunt. And so I had left him back at the lodge, but we had some rain for a little bit after the animal was downed and went to work. We didn't have any bear issues at that pond, which was they just seemed to come in on every other hunt I ever had, and had been charged at that pond before.
Ooh.
And had some pretty scary moments there. But we didn't have any bear issues there. We built a big old fire because we were soaking wet, and I said, let's get a fire going. I've had plenty of bear problems in here. Let's just get one going. It'd be nice to have anyways. And so we built a big old fire and just started getting the knives out and broke him down. I can't really remember how many trips we took. I want to say we went up and down the river bar 4 times.
Wow.
So we had 4 loads. And that was hind quarter, front quarters, bags of loose meat, backstrap, ribs. And then we had a full hide that I decided to keep the hide, and then I Euroed the moose skull. And getting the rack out of that country was, there were some new cuss words invented that day, getting through some of that terrain. They were happy cuss words, but you're just like, oh my gosh, how is this going to happen?
That's wild. Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I don't think about that, packing that thing out that's that big and trying to navigate that around and everything. That's insane. How much did, and it might be an estimate, but how much do you think this moose weighed?
I would probably put him somewhere around the 12 to 1400 pound range.
Wow, that's a huge animal. That is huge.
Yeah. He was a tank. He did have some teeth missing in his head, and he was obviously an older moose. My boss, who had been, guiding in the area and outfitting in the area for over, 40, 50 years, and his father before that, said, hey, this was a great animal to take because, he probably wasn't going to make it another winter. He was kind of right there at the end of his life, and he did have quite a few teeth missing out of his noggin. So I don't know how well he was eating at the time, but the meat was great. I didn't taste anything that was off from him being an older bull like that. But it was a chore getting it all out. It was about a mile pack out each time.
Wow. Oh man. How long did that take you?
You're taking breaks along the way, and actually getting down that big steep embankment was always a bear. And I carry the big Barney's pack, and it's pretty bomb proof. So for the most part, we would get to that embankment, and I would take the pack off, and I would just let it roll right down the embankment. And it would pile up in alders, and I'd get down there, and we'd saw branches and get the packs back on. And then the river bar was like another, 100 yards from there. And then it was, half a mile back up the river bar to the tent. But I think it took us two days to get that animal. And that was to come back, take a nap, just being super exhausted after that second day, and then went back and got the hide and head on the last trip. And that's per, Alaska regulations. All of the meat has to come out before any of the trophy material.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Man, that is just something that is, at least for me in Texas, is just I'm in awe of the work ethic and the drive and the time that it takes to pack out an animal like that. Even on the elk hunt that I had the privilege to go on, we rode horses and everything into the mountains, but where he killed that bull at, it was sketchy for sure, but he got the horses in there to help us with the pack out on that one. So even that didn't seem, compared to this, it seems like super easy. This is that 2-day pack out that's a lot for sure.
Yeah.
Is that normal? Is that kind of what to expect all the time for packing moose
It
out?
well, no, I was blessed enough to have Evan with me, and the dude's a brute. Um, we strong armed that stuff mainly because I had another hunt coming up. And so we really exhausted ourselves, really pushing it to get that animal out of there as quick as I could. And just knowing the area and the problems I had had with some angry grizzlies in the past, I said the more time we spend in there around that meat pile, we're going to have an issue. And I want to see bears have a good time and live their life. And I don't want to be in a situation where I've decided to take another day and sit around camp and then, create a situation where, you know, we're face to face with a grizzly when it could have
Right.
been prevented.
Yeah, for
You know
sure.
what I'm saying? But we got, um, and actually my boss had flown in, I think on the 7th day to drop some more propane because our stove expired for whatever reason. So Evan and I resorted to just cooking everything we had and boiling water for coffee and everything on a campfire in the morning and at night. And I mean, it is what it is. We just made it happen. But he had flown in to give us some more fuel and stuff, and he said there was another guide and his wife a few drainages over, and he got the opportunity to hunt his own moose also. In fact, his wife was the one that had the tag, and extremely good people. He's was an excellent doll sheep guide, moose bear guide. A lot of respect for that kid. And his wife ended up taking, I think, a 70-inch moose,
Oh, wow.
2 drainages over from me. And so my boss was like, well, Ryan got this, or Kristen had got this big moose and they're pumped. And I think it's going to happen for you. And I got a good feeling for you. And so that was like a little more pep in our step. Things were starting to move around. And then we encountered that moose. And I was like, I had texted my boss on the inReach and said, I think this moose is going to go well over 70. And when he flew in with his brother, they landed and we were just showing up with the head and stuff. And he looked at it, and for a guy that had been guiding there and living in that country since he was a kid, a very small kid, he just said, "Oh my God, this moose is unreal." He goes, "I haven't seen anything like this in 40 years."
Wow. Wow.
And 40 years ago, it was his mother that had actually taken an 80-inch moose
Oh, wow.
in that drainage, and it was in our trophy room at the lodge. An 80-inch moose. It might have been a few inches over.
That's
I can't
insane.
quite remember, but he said that's the biggest moose in this area.
Wow. So how does your moose rank? I mean, obviously you're talking about, there being 80-inch moose and stuff
Yeah,
like that in the same drainage,
yeah.
but how does your moose rank in the grand scheme of things, whether it's for that area or for Alaska or just on a trophy scale?
Sure, sure. He's basically within that like top 50.
Okay.
Um, and so he was 255 gross and some change, and then I think he was 239 and 4/8 net, and when he had dried out. So he was right on that cusp of being, completely all time top 50 moose.
Wow.
Alaska, Yukon.
That's crazy. And I'm assuming that you had him officially scored in a record book.
Yeah, I did. I had actually had him scored here in Gunnison. There's a measurer here in Gunnison, and he had scored him. And I had a couple people say, "Well, you brought him back with the skull cap. Like, why didn't you do keep the full euro, like the whole face and everything like that. And I said, well, we couldn't fit him in the plane. we had to saw him off right here. And I guess you could have kept the bottom part and maybe glued it on. But I mean, I'm a big fan of the euro. I'm a big fan of the skull cap. I like that. I'm not a huge hair on guy.
Yeah.
I just like to see the skull and, the antlers or whatever it is. But we had thought about tying it to the strut of the Super Cub, but for the wind and just my boss being an expert bush pioneer of bush flying, he said, we're just not going to put it on the strut, not something this big.
Yeah.
And so we had to fit it in there 7 different ways. And then I think we tied the door shut with a shoelace. And so I think
the door shut of your airplane.
Yeah. Oh, this guy is an absolute legend and expert. And he was basically flew back to the lodge about 30 miles with pretty much the door of the Super Cub open.
Wow.
With the antlers sticking out. We had gloves all over the tines to keep it from poking fabric and things like that.
That's wild.
But yeah, it was quite the trip. And I could definitely die a happy moose hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah. What an experience.
After filling a tag like that, absolutely. And it's really cool too. I like the component of, what you described as in where you killed him being an area that you're very familiar with, and you've been like that pond and that spot specifically, you've been very successful with clients and stuff. And that just goes to show, like, even though this is your first moose, all that experience and knowledge that you had gained over the years with other people, it paying off in the end for even you to be able to go out there and hunt. That's just really cool to me. I love that.
Yeah. It was cool to keep tabs on him over those years. And I kind of created this hunting page on Facebook called Hunt with Bunt. And I put up this post where it actually has footage of him in 22 and in 23 in different spots. And I mean, there's just absolutely no mistake with that animal of that size and how his front guards were and his bay tine, and he had kickers off the back side that you can't even see.
That's awesome. What a beast.
Yeah.
John, what you got over there? You got any
Oh,
questions,
yeah,
comments, thoughts?
No, I don't know where I was in the order of operations on him sending pictures out, but dude, I got that picture and I was like, there's no way. And it was so cool to see. I was so stoked for him. I'm got to figure out how to hire him one day.
Yeah, we all do. That's a heck of a moose for sure, man.
Yeah.
Well, any I know we've been going for a while now, and I hate to be the guy that starts heading for home with the episode, but is there any other pieces of this story or anything we're missing that we haven't talked about or haven't covered yet that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, after this moose had showed up to the camp, I sensed a little bit of just kind of my outfitter's attitude changed a little bit.
Okay.
He had flown me out for my next hunt, and things were fairly quiet between him and I, and went out on the last hunt, and we didn't see any moose on the upper part of the drainage. We had an opportunity at a monster grizzly that unfortunately the hunter made a poor shot, and I wasn't able to follow him up with a good shot, and the bear had gotten away, and it got scary. I had to go in and, try to track the bear. And this and that. And this was actually a bear that I had seen for numerous years in there. And so it was a little bit of a slow last hunt with a kind of a big disappointment for me to see that bear at least not harvested and brought back. After watching that bear for so many years also. You do get connected to these animals. It's not complete savagery as most people think. There's a really deep connection to a lot of these animals, and there always will be with me. But we had got done with the hunt and we flew back, and it was a pretty quiet flight back. And long story short was I don't think he was very happy with me taking that particular moose out of his concession.
Really?
And there was some talks, some private talks for, between him and I, as the last hunter was packing up his stuff and this and that. And I had volunteered to ride back to him in Anchorage, and I'm getting my things together. And basically my employer had informed me that he didn't want me back anymore.
Really? Oh, wow.
And so I I didn't really know how to handle it at the moment. He had stormed off, and I had tried to talk to him and see what the hell was on his mind. And, he had promised me previous years that, he was going to set me out on my own hunt. And I had done some work for him on the side to where, was compensated for plane fuel and things like that. And I had bought my own tag. I'd paid for my own food, my own supplies, all my stuff. And so it wasn't a money issue. I think some of those outfitters, I have a lot of respect for the business, and I'm a bird of one feather there. You know what I'm saying? Or we're feathers all from the same bird type of deal. And so from the employers that I'm working for now, they had basically told me that it was a no-brainer. You had lost your job because you had taken the biggest moose out of his concession. There was they said that don't look at it in any other way. If you would have brought back a 55-inch bull, you'd still be guiding there.
Wow. And this is the same guy that was in awe of the moose when he first laid eyes on it and all that kind of stuff, and told you that a moose this age was a good one to kill.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
And I mean, it was those moments and those comments that he had made. Okay, yeah, that is a true statement. He knew this was an older moose, and yes, of course, it was an older moose to shoot. That's the one you want, the mature ram, the mature moose, the mature bear.
Right.
Okay. There's nothing there, but there wasn't any real hooting and hollering, and there wasn't any. He kept very, very reserved. And I mean, he was a very reserved and modest employer. I had a lot of respect for this man, and I still really do, outside of what happened.
Yeah.
But from what I've heard from some of the very reputable employers that I work for now, it was simply, hey, if you would have taken a smaller moose, this wouldn't have been a problem. And I mean, these guys spend so much time in the air in the off season and transporting hunters to and from. They know what is in their area.
Right.
He had seen this moose for who knows how long. And for one of his guides to probably take it outside of a client paying $36,000 for a 10-day hunt with me. I think that it set in, and that was the reaction I got from him. And so I basically loaded up my stuff, and the hunter I rode back to Anchorage with had a U-Haul van, a box truck, and I put my moose in there, and that was the first time he had even seen my moose. And he about crapped his pants, and we threw it in the van, and I drove all the way back to Anchorage after essentially getting fired with
Wow.
this client sitting next to me. And all I wanted to do was like, I just wanted to pull over on the side of the road and kind of let it all out a little bit. But instead, I'm like driving this U-Haul back to Anchorage, like, all right, well, I lost the job with probably one of the best outfitters in Alaska, and a guy I absolutely admired and had a lot of respect for. And it's stone cold now.
Wow. That's
And
wild.
so I took a spring bear season off, and I regrouped. I really thought about it a lot there for a little bit. Sam, I couldn't even look at the moose on my wall because
Really?
of what had happened
Hmm.
between him and I. But then I started to just kind of, you got to just move on. And I sent out some resumes to some companies I had been sussing out for years. And now I guide for Hidden Alaska guides in the Alaska range for moose and bear. And then just now got put on to the legendary Larson Bay Lodge
Hmm.
in Larson Bay, Kodiak Island, and actually this was my first spring there, and did really well there, and actually took a Boone and Crockett bear with my last hunter.
That's
So
awesome.
maybe there was a silver lining in things. That's the way I kind of look at things, and it's too bad it kind of went that way, but I'm very pleased with the moose and the work I got at that operation, and it's made me a different person. The whole hunt, the whole experience, to have that animal, a memory of that animal on the wall. I have no problem looking at it these days, and I've kind of pulled up my boots, so to speak, and I have no stopping me. I don't think the guiding is going to stop anytime soon. I think it's only just going to get stronger.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, that's a I mean, there's the old saying, right? That all good things come to an end, and you hate for it to come to that kind of end and seemingly over an animal like that, nonetheless. But it sounds like it sounds like you're kicking better than ever right now and doing some awesome stuff. So I'm happy for you with that.
Yeah, and one more note that's kind of funny is he had a hunt broker that he had worked with forever. And of course, the very next year, the hunt promotion for his camp was my huge trophy moose in the middle of the international, you know, hunt page to advertise hunts. And I'm like, hey, I know that guy. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
And it may go up again this year. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I
He's
was
like,
just
I'm
like,
gonna
all
I'm
right,
gonna
well,
get something out of this moose one way or another.
and I had moose hunters stacked up behind. I had return clients coming back, and I kind of had to text them all and just be like, I'm at a new operation, and I'd love to take you out again or whatever. And things happen, and so maybe we'll cross paths, at a later time, and maybe be able to shake hands and shrug it off. But um, I just
Yeah.
left it all out on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's that's a hard part of life for sure is navigating situations like that. But
yep.
well, man, I do appreciate you coming on this show to share your story. And before I get to my closing questions with you, I want to make sure that John doesn't have anything that he wants to ask or add or anything on his end?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just gonna spill the beans that he then drew a moose tag here in Colorado the year after and shot a bull. So a little jelly there.
How big was that one?
Got that picture in the text message and was like, son of a man.
The big one got away with the muzzle loader. And then I shot a smaller bull that was like mid 30s with my 270, and he should be done with the taxidermy thing. I actually did, after telling you I do just bone only. I was like, you know what, I might have to do my Shiras with the hair on. He had a big old beautiful bell hanging down, and the guy gave me a deal on the taxidermy. And so I was like, been joking with myself, when I get this moose, I'm gonna put it right in the middle of the one that I got up in the like up north, because it would
Sit
literally
inside each
fit
other.
inside of it.
Wow. That's awesome. I love that. Well,
I don't
congrats
know how
on
I'm gonna.
both your moves.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, I could die tomorrow and I'd be pretty happy with the whole moose hunting scene.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, the closing questions I got for you, they're questions I ask any first time guest that I have on the show. We haven't really talked or touched on archery. I don't even know if archery is in your arsenal at all, but I always ask people the simple question of gun or bow.
I'm gonna go with the gun because I'm a cowboy and
I like it.
I like the crack of the rifle. I there's not much more to it than that. I've never really learned to shoot a bow. Maybe someday, but I am a true cowboy, and I do like to shoot the rifle.
Fair enough. Plenty of respect for that.
Yep.
Next question, and it very likely could be, for all I know, the entirety of this podcast that we've been talking about it. But I always ask folks, what is your favorite hunting memory to date in your life?
Well, I would I would have to say that it was is my big Alaskan moose,
I,
hands down.
I would expect it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I don't think there's really anything too close to that. My dad did drop a big bull on one of our horseback hunts, and that will be with me forever also. Um, but the moose was and just how everything unraveled, I think it was a little bit of a roller coaster. It made me a different person these days, and I try to keep my head up from it all, and just I do look back on it and I reflect on it a lot. There's nothing I would change. And so for that, I feel super blessed with what I got to do.
absolutely. For sure, man. Last question, and I'm curious what this is for you because whether it's as a guide or in some instances as the hunter, you are getting to live out or experience what a lot of people would consider their once in a lifetime bucket list hunt. They're probably booking with you, maybe even to go on that hunt. But for you personally, what is at the top of your bucket list that you would consider a once in a lifetime hunt if you got to do it yourself?
Um, I would say it's a very close call between a doll ram and a big brown bear. I think the doll sheep's going to take the cake though.
Yeah. Why is that?
I really enjoy the doll sheep hunting. I'm kind of built for it. Living at altitude and stuff, I do spend a lot of time in the high mountains, and I just like the terrain that they live in. I like the complexity of the hunt. I like the challenge of it. Um, it's pretty close to chasing, elk around in the high mountains. It's very taxing, but they're such grand animals, and they have such a large territory to work with, just like elk do. But as far as a dream hunt, it would probably be a Alaska doll sheep.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, before we conclude, John, you got anything else?
No, I was just glad to get Justin on. I've been wanting to hear this story another time, and he told it really well.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it, man. I appreciate you taking the time this evening to come on Fall Obsession Podcast and share every bit about it and a lot about guiding in general. So thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell our listeners where they can find you or follow you real quick before we conclude.
Yeah, on Facebook, it'll be Hunt with Bunt. And that's kind of a bigger platform for a lot of pictures and posting and some connections to the outfitters that I work for. And then I have a general Instagram, Justin Bunting 81.
Well, there you go. Well, folks, make sure that you guys follow Justin on Facebook and Instagram. Make sure you follow Fall Obsession if you're not already. And with that, we're going to wrap this episode up. Hope you guys enjoy this conversation. I'm Sam Thrash. I'm your host, and I will be back with you guys again next week for another Fall Obsession podcast. Catch you then.